每天做。
哦，你
我每天在读了啊，没有做了，每天都在读。
现在你进课哦，可以。
好。
对啦，还是给他赶快考过啦。那个，我本来是想说跟他讲说，这学期几位同学要考完，我才想，就是这学期我们用这个，就是那个学术伦理来做我们的那个成绩啊。那蔡大哥，我们班好像只有你还没过呢。对啊，上次那个阮同学、越南同学都考过了。
我不想，我只要一题没有过，我就重新读一遍了。
为什么要这样呢？
因为我们以前飞机就这样子啊，一颗螺丝坏了全部修啊。
不需要吧？你何必要这样子？这学期你如果没有过的话，你这个课我就没有办法给你过啊。这学期我要用这个打分数呢。
好，那我就照那个考题去做了。哦，
对了，我来讲一下，因为其实还有讲导他们都还没考，我要跟他们说一下了哦。今天如果大家的那个课程啊，就是我们因为上个礼拜已经讲完的那个学术伦理的部分了嘛，那现在我们今天还是继续分享那个论文的写作哦。那我们还是把课程分成两个部分哦，一个部分就是讨论各位的研讨会论文，第二个部分呢就是分享一些那个论文写作技巧的一些影片，跟大家做分享。那今天我挑了一个韩国首尔大学的一个外文的演讲，那有字幕有字幕。我是觉得他讲的其实还蛮深的哦，但是毕竟是国外的演讲者哦，所以他可以提供一个比较不相同的观点哦。那我就把荧幕切过去哦，我就分享那个荧幕，我们看看。
paper, but they're the most compact. They have the most data. And at the end, your discussion is a bit longer. So this is just the structure. Okay, so let's talk about each part in particular. And this is the order that you will usually papers and also to check what other editors see and how they edit. So personally, I have a master's degree in English. I am not a scientific researcher, but I have edited hundreds and hundreds of scientific manuscripts. So what we're going to talk about today is going to be about writing quality. So we're not going to focus on research or journals, etc. And before we go on, I'm going to tell you a bit about myself. So I am the managing editor at Essay Review, and what my job is to edit papers and also to check what other editors, what it stands for, you'll know. IMRD stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, Discussion. So that's going to be what we will discuss today. It's the body of most research papers. You want to put the right content in the right place. Okay, so we're going to show you how to do that. The third factor of writing is relevance. Relevance means a lot of things, but it means conforming to the length guidelines. It means choosing the right data. So, for example, if you have a research paper that's 4,000 words, you don't want to write 10 results or 10 methods. Probably you want a smaller amount of methods. So what the exact answer is, it's really up to you, but you want to make sure that the research methods and results you include are relevant and the most important methods, most important results. Fourth factor of writing is clarity. Clarity means writing clearly, writing elegantly and nicely. So it should be easy to read and understand. Your paper should not be a struggle. I understand the English is not most of your first language, so we don't expect, in most journals don't expect you to get the language perfect. And when you send the manuscript to editor, 우리 교정할 때, 에디터는 교정할 때, they just edit for grammar and for clear communication. They cannot change the structure of your paper. So this is going to be up to you. But as far as clarity goes, we can help you with that as editors. So you need to use proper grammar, phrasing, and style, and not too many extra words. Okay, this below, I don't know if you can see, but this is kind of a golden rule for all rules. You want to check the formatting and style rules of your target journal. So if you're applying to, I don't know, Bioscience Monthly, you want to read everything about authors or for authors section, and you want to read as many articles as possible to get a sense of what their articles look like. Okay, so now that we've discussed that, let's talk about research writing structure. So basically, there are 4 main parts in most research papers that you need to follow, and they're usually in this order, and that is introduction, methods, results, and a discussion. Sometimes you have a concluding paragraph. You've probably seen this structure before, I imagine, but maybe you haven't learned exactly what to do with them. Who here has written a research paper for a journal? Raise your hand if you've written a paper for a journal. A couple of you. How about, have you written a research paper for a class? 논문을 써서 수업에게 for class? If not, then yeah, this is a really good lecture to attend because we're going to be talking about the basics. But even researchers who have written many, many articles can still benefit from learning how to write these sections.
我想请问一下各位，大家都已经开始写研讨会论文了吗？我知道有几位已经开始了，但是已经有确定要投哪一篇研讨会了吗？
我们预计是投6月7号的。
6月7号的哪一个研讨会？
邱老师建议的那一场。
是上次有给我看过的，对不对？
对。
哪一个学校？上次看忘记了。民传是不是？6月7号。民传6月7号。那时间很赶
对呀。
他们现在应该已经都收了吧？现在他们都已经在收那个收摘要了吧
？6月7号截止。
6月7号才不是6月7号研讨会，6月7号截止，摘要截止是不是？
好像4张吧，要4张。
但是它的字数不是像论文的4张啦，应该会比较小，应该是比较小。那大家的进度嘞？
正在努力
是不是？好，那如果有什么需要讨论的，我们就随时丢上来，大家来讨论。
好。
好不好？好，那我们就继续。
So your information actually moves from broad to specific and back to broad. So this is the shape of the research paper. You notice it has a sort of funnel shape. So you start with the introduction, what is known, the basic topic that you're going to discuss, and you quickly move into the literature. What is unknown? What are the gaps in the literature? And in the middle here, you can see this is your hypothesis. So you're going to give a very short statement about what your research study is doing. What's the purpose of it? And your methods and results section, you can see your methods and results are the shortest. They're the shortest part of your paper, but they're the most compact. They have the most data. And at the end, your discussion is a bit longer. So this is just the structure. Okay, so let's talk about each part in particular. And this is the order that you will usually read a research paper. So the introduction, what does it do? Introduction discusses the problem, that you're going to research. It discusses the background and describes how your research fits into the known information. You'll also see a lot of primary literature introduced, so a lot of citations. That is, the introduction is the place where you see the most citations. This study, Smith and Burke, 1995, right? Those citations for other studies. You see introduction. Okay, the methods quickly tell us how you did the study and which materials and methods of experimentation, which methods of analysis you used. The results explain the important findings of your study. They do not discuss the importance of the findings. They simply talk about what you found, what your methods found. And finally, the discussion explains what your findings mean. Why are they important? And what are the implications for other research? It also can talk about limitations. If you study about farming and you study about cows, you do research about cows, you could say, this study applies to this kind of cow, but it might not apply to other cows. So these are limitations you need to include. And you can discuss possible research in the future. All right, so let's do our first quiz. And if you know the answer, just raise your hand anytime. You don't have to wait for me to finish. And I'll try to choose whoever is first. Okay, which one? Your quiz is not in the PPT. There's no answer. Okay, which one is not a factor that affects quality of research writing? Is it A, coherence, B, clarity, C, novelty, D, organization? C, novelty? Are you sure? That's right. Right, good. So you can get a coupon afterwards, if you like. So novelty might affect your research, right? You want to do a study of something that hasn't been done before, but you don't want to write in a crazy way. It's not a creative writing course, right? So you don't want to be the one that writes, in a novel way. You want to follow the rules. Okay, number 2. What does the discussion conclusion section do? A, presents the findings of your research. B, gives the context and background of your research. C, explains the meaning of the findings, includes implications and limitations. D, discusses how your study was conducted. Yes. C, discussion explains the meaning of the findings. Ding dong ding dong. That's right. Okay, so in the discussion is where you talk about why your study is important. I will show you how to do that. Moving on, let's talk about how to compose the paper. As you saw earlier, I don't know whether to move over here or stay here. I might move later. Okay, so even though your introduction comes first, you actually begin with the methods section. You're going to write that first. And then you will write the results, the discussion, and finally the introduction. And the reason for this is so you don't leave anything out in the introduction. You don't include something new in the discussion that you didn't introduce. So everything, all of the main meat of the paper should be introduced. It's like a summary, right? Summarize what your study is going to do. You're not going to put exact figures and data about your study, but you're going to discuss what your study yielded, what you did. Okay, now before writing your paper, you should know what your hypothesis is, and you should know what your research questions are. So for example, what did the study seek to find? One example of this question is the study sought to find how many university students are satisfied with their school's facilities. Okay. Another question you need to know the answer to. What is your study's main arguments or questions? For example, this study, how many students report satisfaction with materials? What are the most common complaints students make about their universities? I'm sure you have some common complaints in your mind. But if you're doing a study on universities and the satisfaction with the university classes, this would be one of your main questions. You should find the answer to this question in the results. You also want to decide which audience or journal you're writing for. really the only way to know how to do this is to read the articles in the journal. Or if you're applying for a conference, to research that conference and see what other authors, how other authors write. That's about all we can say about that. Okay, so the first thing to do before actually writing the section is to prepare the figures and tables. This is your core data. This is the most important aspect of your research paper, right? So you want to gather and create and gather everything in one place. So you have your data. You're going to make it into figures and tables. You've probably already done that before you put a pen to the paper. Then you want to give those data captions and numbers. So you want to put them in order. So you know what order you're going to be writing about them when you write the methods and results. Right? So place them in the order. Because your paper will just be writing in the sentence this data. Just going to make sentences out of the data. That's what a paper is, really. Alright, so in the second step, you're going to write the methods. So this is really the first part of the paper. Here's some questions you should ask. How was the study carried out and analyzed? In this section, you should describe experiments, explain why procedures were chosen, why you used this method of analysis, or why you took this sample. Explain how your results were analyzed. And this is usually the order. We'll show you here, actually. Organization. Okay. So the first content you will write about is your materials that you used. That means where you got your materials, and if you do a sample study, what your sample is. Is it adults aged 25 to 30? Or is it children? So you're going to put that right away in the beginning. Second, you're going to discuss how materials were prepared. What did you do with the materials to get ready to study them? Third, how are your measurements made? Okay, you can talk about the techniques you use to measure your data. And fourth, what methods of analysis did you use? You get into more and more detail as you go on. Okay, here's some rules. You usually want to if you think about it chronologically, so what did you do first? We did this first, and then we did this, and then we did this. That's a good way to organize. Also, when you do the results, your results should be in the same order as your methods. You can also organize it from most to least important. So if you have methods that are, very, very central, put those first. Methods of analysis. If you have other methods of analysis, the details are not the most important, but you might want to, tell your reader about them, then, put them last. Your methods section is only about 10%, right? It's very short, 10% of your paper. It could be longer than that. It might be 20%, but generally speaking, methods is shorter than the other parts. In this section, these are, in red, you can see some grammar rules. It's not like a hard rule, but generally speaking, most journal articles will use passive voice and past tense for the methods. It's not, again, many teachers will say, professors will say, use active voice, but we still find that in the methods, passive voice and active are used, but you should try to be consistent with your voice. Do not discuss the results. Okay? Don't talk about what you found, just how you found them. And be sure to use quantitative details in addition to your techniques and methods of analysis. The first thing you're going to do is to create a list of your materials and methods. This means if you know what you used for your study, just make a list of it. So in 3 groups, you have materials and sample. Let's just say you used 100 grams of potatoes, a cheesecloth, and distilled water. Okay, it's a very simple experiment, very simple study. Your next group is your preparation. So in a little phrase, what did you do? You skinned the potato with a knife. You got catecholase extract. You blended the potatoes in water. You stored in 13 degrees Celsius refrigerator for 24 hours. So list all of the things you did, and also list your methods of analysis in phrases. Spectrophotometer used to measure optical density. I recalibrated it using signal linearization. Okay, so it's not a sentence yet. So from this, you can write the information as a sentence. So notice A and A are the same, but we've just written A in a sentence form. So a plain cheesecloth, pure distilled water, and 100 grams of raw potatoes were purchased. Notice that you have your materials in sample at the beginning. Next, in preparing the catechol extract, 100 grams of potatoes were skinned with a paring knife, washed and diced, etc., etc. So, and again, in red, we have the verbs. They're in past tense and passive voice, so you can see how to put them in that tense. And last, you have your methods of analysis. A spectrophotometer was used to measure optical density and calibrated using signal linearization. Now you're ready to write your methods. So you're going to separate the different methods into different paragraphs. So this is one paragraph. If you have methods of analysis, you might separate this into a paragraph as well. So try to keep your paragraphs separate based on the methods that you used and the methods of analysis that you used. Okay, so we're going to look at a sample. This sample I chose is from Public Library of Science, PLOS. You can find free open source open access journals on this site, this papers. So this one is about kimchi. I thought it would be nice to do a sample about kimchi. So let's start with
他现在要讲一个韩国泡菜的论文，
This student starts
这
with
个
the
范例
heading
也蛮有
sample
趣的，我
preparation.
昨天有看过
Now。you don't need to use a heading. You might be able to use it, but not all journals use headings, obviously. But if you can, it's helpful to show the reader, to organize your paper and show the reader what you're doing in the upcoming paragraph. So the first thing that this researcher does is discuss materials, site, and sample. 20 kimchi samples made from Korean or Chinese kimchi cabbage were acquired via online markets. Okay, so we have where they're from and what the materials are. And then you have the exact place where they were procured. They came from Gyeonggi, Chungcheongbuk, etc. And then the Chinese kimchi samples were purchased in the same month. So you have the place and where in China they were purchased, right? And before we go on, these were all one sentence or one paragraph. So I've separated them so you can see the different parts. But 이거는 다 한 문장이야. I just 따로따로. I made it separate. Okay. Sorry about my Korean. Okay. The next thing you'll do is explain the preparation, how you prepared the materials. So you're going to have a lot of verbs here. A lot of verbs. Each head of kimchi cabbage was cut. Action verb. The cut kimchi samples were stored in sealed bags. The samples were frozen using liquid nitrogen and then ground using electronic blender. The ground samples were stored at negative 80 degrees Celsius using MALDI-TOF MS analysis. Okay, so again, you have passive voice and a lot of different verbs. This is a style issue, but it will help your article not be so boring and repetitive. If you use the same verbs again, it's not really fun, interesting to read. Okay, so let's look at the second part of methods. We won't read everything. I'll just try to go through important parts. So again, this author, notice the heading, MALDI-TOF MS analysis. So what is this paragraph about? Well, it's going to be about this method of analysis. It's really easy to know. If you're skimming through the paper, you can see where this information, what this is. So you start with how the major measurements and calculations were made. Start with the broad methods first. So MAULI TOF MS analysis was performed in triplicate for kimchi samples without protein extraction. And then this is how this was done in order. First, kimchi samples were mixed and homogenized using a 1-to-1 ratio, etc. And then later on, you have further details about the analysis methods. So it explains the range of mass spectra and the extraction times, etc. So you have all these these little quantitative details later. So don't put these first. Start with the method of analysis first. How did you do it? And then later you can discuss further details about how you analyzed your data. Okay, what do I have here? Provide quantified details and measurements. Okay, so not just a lot of, many, most, the majority of. Use numbers. You can use a lot of numbers here. Okay, so we have 1-to-1 ratio, 30% to 1,000 to 20,000. You can see this. All right, so the third one, the third part of the methods, they have mass fingerprinting analysis. So this is the second method of analysis that they discuss. And here they break it down into PCA, principal component analysis, and HCA. You'll see this later when we look at the results. In the results section, they will have the same order, PCA and HCA. List the analytical methods first, quantified information second. So you have the methods, and in blue is some quantified data. Again, HCA was used, how it was done, and here's the values in blue. And again, this is one paragraph, so the author has squished it together, but sort of it's micro-organized, right? It's still got each method of analysis separated, but then the details are put after it. But it will be this is one paragraph in the original. Okay, so methods, quiz. See if you remember what I just said. What statement about methods is not true? A, headings are sometimes used in the methods section. B, methods are organized chronologically and in order of importance. The methods section describes how experiments are done. Or D, the methods contains information about research findings. Which one's not true? Yes, you sir. Which one? D? Last one? Which is not true. The methods contains information about research findings. That's right. Wow, you guys are 3 for 3. Nice job. The methods contains no information about findings. Just how you did the experiment or how you did the study. Which is the best example of a sentence found in the methods? Many people got this wrong, or maybe it's my fault, but there is one that is the best based on what we just talked about. So try to keep that in mind. Hey, 54 men ages 30 to 39 were placed in wooden chairs. The spectrometer readings were 58.99 nanometers, respectively. C, cancer is a leading cause of death in the United States. Or D, researchers should place slides under a 300 times microscope. Yeah. Which one? A? First one? I think you're the first one to get it right the first time. Nice job. Yeah, why? Why do you think why is this the best answer? Yeah, right, good, thank you. It's clear, like, what the sample is, right? This is actually maybe near the beginning. But it's how the sample the procedure was undertaken, right? And we have our sample 50 for men, what their age are, and then what you're doing to them. I don't know what's going on with this method, but what's happening in this experiment. Okay, let's move on to the results. After you finish the methods, you're going to write the results. I'm going to switch again. Okay, so the results tell you what you found. So you're going to present the findings in the same order as I mentioned. Methods, results. Method analysis 1, results of the analysis 1. Methods of analysis 2 is the second set of results from that analysis. You're going to present the data in figures and tables and as text. So your result is your figures and tables and is also the text. The text is the figures and tables. It's just explained in sentences. You're going to report on data collection and participants and report data relevant to your research question. So if you have many results, you just choose the most.
讲到我刚刚有跟您讲说，这学期我会用这个我们上个礼拜考完的那个学术伦理的成绩作为学习成绩哦。那可能还是要请您抽空把这个考试给考完，可以吗？像我们班上大概剩3位没考完嘛，就是您还有那个吴老师跟蔡大哥3位哦，其他同学都已经把那个学术伦理的成绩上传了哦。那再麻烦您，因为我学期末要用这个东西打成绩。
Most important, the most relevant to your research questions. We'll skip through these. You can read them later, just because we have a lot to do. So the organization of your results, as I've mentioned several times, same order as methods, and answer the research question as presented in the figures. So for example, your research question that you said in the introduction was, how do hospital patients over age 55 feel about post-operative care? In the data, or the way you'll present this based on the data might look like this. Hospital patients over the age of 55 were 30% more likely to report negative experiences with post-operative care. Okay, this is what your general your general results might look like, one of your results. Then you can elaborate with secondary results. So after you write your main result, you put the details. Same with the methods. You have the main method and then the details. So the common negative issues reported were inattention by nurses, etc. And then here you can cite your figures and tables as well. So let's talk about writing captions very quickly. Captions are not sentences. They're almost always phrases, starting with a noun, your main keyword, and then what your figure or table is measuring. So if the survey question is, let's say you ask some participants, what do hospital patients over the age of 55 think about post-operative care? And this is the data you come up with. This probably doesn't really look like it makes sense, but for the sake of the picture, attitudes towards post-operative care of patients over 55. That's how you can write your caption. When you write your text, you're going to write as a full sentence, obviously. So you're going to write the captions first before you write the results section. Let's look at our example again. So you can see they start with this, MALDI TOF MS analysis. That was the first method of analysis brought up in the method section, right? Remember? So this author addresses the research question with details about the data. The MALDI TOF MS spectra of kimchi fermented for 1, 2, 3 weeks were obtained in the mass range of 2,000, 20,000, and Z. In total, 80 spectra were recorded in triplicate. So here's the data that they came up with. And the second research question is, how will MALDI TOF MS approach, what will the approach yield in terms, in determining fermentation differences? So this is answering that question. Here's the secondary details. However, the mass range of actual acquired mass spectra was set to 2,000 to 10,000 NC. Mass peaks greater than 10,000 were not detected in kimchi samples. Okay, so you've got details about this analysis. Your caption presents data as a statement, right? Here's the caption. PCA of mass spectra of Korean and Chinese kimchi during mass fermentation. This is the text for this figure. I know gets really dry looking at every detail of these. Let's just look at what this author is doing. Okay? Again, this is the subheading. Discrimination of kimchi by fermentation time based on geographical origin using PCA. Well, that was our first method of analysis, right? PCA. So this addresses a second research question, which is how were the kimchi samples differentiated using PCA? They discuss how they examined these correlations. They were expressed using three-dimensional scatter plots. So here's the scatter plots. And then figure 1 shows the sample score plots. And actually they list more details in their paper, which I did not put here. But you can see they start with discussing how they analyzed the data, what they came up with, and then the details, more details about this data. And they also say figure 1 shows the sample. So they're having a sort of dialogue with the figure. They're saying, if you want to see the details of this, look at figure 1. Figure 1 shows XYZ. So there's a lot of discussion about what is being shown in these figures. Okay, here's the third paragraph. Remember, it's one paragraph. This is the heading, discrimination of kimchi by fermentation phase based on origin using HCA. Now, HCA was the second method of analysis, if you remember. And another research question is addressed. How were the kimchi samples differentiated using HCA? These research questions you should have in your mind before you write the paper. You can answer it in your results. And here, this is not a comparison of, it's not a discussion about the results, just comparing the basic results. So you're not discussing the meaning of the results, just basically comparing them. So in contrast, Korean kimchi sample D is not clearly associated with any of the Korean or Chinese kimchi samples. So, so you're showing how the samples differed. But you'll see how later on in the discussion section, you're going to discuss what that means and the larger importance of the findings. But be careful not to include discussion in the results. Okay, so let's talk about some data guidelines for results. This is just a few. There's many things you want to keep in mind, but generally, indicate statistical tests used with all relevant parameters. So use mean and standard deviation. Be specific. Median and interpercentile range. Be specific. Use quantitative details. Use mean and standard deviation to report normally distributed data. Use median and interpercentile range to report skewed data. You could probably find these results, guidelines and parameters in the journal, in the the for authors section. You can often find, how they want you to report these. For numbers, use 2 significant digits. Don't write 2.07856444 unless you're dealing with, nano measurements. Never use percentages for very small samples. Okay, use 1 out of 2 instead of 50%. These are basic rules that if you read the for authors section, you can get an idea of what to do in this section. Okay, quiz 3. What should the results section include? A, background information about your study. B, statements about data, figures, and tables. C, a concise hypothesis or problem statement. D, data from related research sources. Yes, sir. B, it should include statements about data, figures, and tables. You guys are 5 for 5. Better than the other schools so far. Should I tell you the other schools that we've done this at? Maybe later. Right, your data in the figures and tables are the results written as sentences in the order so the reader understands. That's all it is. Okay, you only get one question for results. The fourth step, which is the fourth section, is the discussion section. So you're going to say here what the results mean. What is the point of these results? This is the easiest section to write, but it's the hardest section to get right. Does that make sense? Many authors can just write as much as possible, and you can be a little bit looser in this section. But what you want to do is sell your study. Why is your study important? Why do people want to read it? What are the implications of your work? Okay, so you want to sell your data. You know, like if you're a saleswoman, when you're discussing these. Criticize and justify your study's methods. Suggest improvements for how other studies could be better done to get more information about this topic. Answer the question, did your study contribute to knowledge in the field or not? Does your study help fill in the gap, or did it fail? You need to be honest too. You don't want to say, in my study, this was the most groundbreaking study about pizza ever done. It's going to change the face of food and pizza. Well, you probably want to be specific about the kind of pizza that you're changing and how. Discuss the impact of the research on other areas if it applies. Okay, let's keep going here. Here's some tips for a discussion. So first, focus on what is most important, then move to least important. Good rule. Start with an analysis of your results, and then move to implications. We'll show you the structure next. So you're going to talk about a summary of the results. Why is it important? What can be done to make it better? Divide the analysis by paragraph. This goes with organization and clarity, the writing factor. Don't smush everything together because the discussion section is very long. So you don't want to just write one paragraph. You need to make sure each paragraph has a separate idea. We'll skip the grammar stuff. Okay, you can read the rest later because there's a lot of details, but I want to look at the structure and what the author has done to put the correct structure here. Okay, in this discussion, they have not used any headings. For some reason, there's no headings. But they've still organized each paragraph, each one paragraph, by topic. So they start by summarizing the process, the results, and overall purpose. So in this study, Maldi TOF MS was utilized to discriminate between Chinese and Korean kimchi of different geological words. So you'll see this sentence in your introduction too. The discussion and the introduction have a lot in common. The discussion just has a lot more about what the results mean and why they're important. But this start off by, why is your study important and what did it yield? So they write, to the best of our knowledge, a mass fingerprinting approach using Maldi TOF has not been performed to analyze kimchi samples. You're comparing your study to other studies. Why is your study better? Why is it unique? And they do this again. The mass spectra of kimchi samples obtained were analyzed using PCA, HCA, and heat maps. This is interesting. PCA, which is a multivariable analysis method, has been applied for the discrimination of coffee, cocoa, wine, saffron, and honey. So you have all these other citations about how it can be used in other similar fermentation studies, other foods, other methods of discrimination. So, well, your study could be important for a lot of foods. And this method has been used a lot of times, so it's a good, reliable method. The author also offers a critique of the study. In this case, it's more of a justification. So because kimchi is a fermented food, to discriminate between Chinese and Korean kimchi based on origin, samples must be prepared at various formation times. So they're giving reasons why they use these times, why they use 10 minutes, and why they use this method. Okay, we'll just move quickly through here. Another result is PCA scatter plots. and explain the significance between of these results to the research. The result implied keywords. We have keywords in blue, by the way, useful verbs. The result implied that various polymers, such as proteins or polysaccharides, disappeared or appeared with the amount affected by fermentation process. Why don't we put this in the results? Because it's a more general observation. It's a more general relationship. It's not an exact finding of the experiment, of the methods. Also, you're going to assess which results were most useful. So which of the results used were most useful? This one says that the principal component scatter plot of the kimchi samples after 4 weeks of formation showed the best discrimination between Chinese group and Korean group as compared with the scatter plots for 1, 2, and 3. So this scatter plot was the most useful. And you can go back to the results and see what that showed. Okay. And this is the last page. They focus on the success of these methods. So HCA was found to discriminate successfully, right? That's the main finding and a main importance of this study. Based on these results, all the kimchi samples clearly successfully clustered into Chinese and Korean groups. So you're discussing how this was the results worked in this case. And you're comparing again this study to related research. The degradation of polymers with the progress of fermentation has been reported for sourdough and other fermented unsalted soybean paste. Therefore, it can be used for other research. And furthermore, therefore, constructing a database of mass spectra. So, if another
今天的这个分享哦，它的难度其实是真的蛮高。那我不知道大家可以听懂几成，就请大家尽量听，因为其实我昨天自己在看的时候，我今天看第二次，我也觉得，不是所有的部分都可以很懂，尤其是中文翻译其实有些，它因为它是电脑自动翻的，有些其实不见得它的意思表达的这么好哦。那我们今天的可能可以不看完，我在想等一下大概等它告一段落的时候，我们先休息，休息之后呢，我们回来，我再跟各位分享一下论文格式的部分哦，那个部分可能对大家来讲会比较容易听得进去啦。那今天这个我是真的觉得偏难的啦。那对于大家来讲，也可能算是一个一个测试吧，看看大家能不能可以掌握几成哦。当然，如果可以掌握的部分越高，就代表说你的功力越好哦。我们来，我今天其实看第二次了啦。那我也不敢讲说我100%都可以 catch 到。我们等一下告一段落，我想大概到7点10分或15分的时候，等他讲一个段落，我们就先休息10分钟，然后接下来我再来跟各位讲论文格式。
Researcher constructs a database that contains the mass spectra and the geographical information. This will allow the kimchi samples to be identified within 10 minutes. So if you do this other kind of work, you might be able to yield even better results, is what they're saying. And in the conclusion, they really point out why that's important. So in the conclusion is the same as the discussion, right? It's just the final paragraph, the yukikyo. Why is the study, so good? So you're going to indicate extensions and further implications. You'll see here. So this author focuses on the success of the study to differentiate kimchi samples. Again, Korean kimchi samples were employed for HCA, which allowed clear differentiation between Chinese and Korean kimchi groups within 10 minutes. So they state clearly this worked, HCA worked to differentiate the samples. And finally, at the very last sentence, they say, our method could be applied to discriminate the origin of other fermented salted vegetables at reduced cost in shorter times. I think the very end of this sentence is a good example of, telling your researchers why the study is awesome, why it rocks. Because it has a lot of other potential, and it could actually affect economics. It could allow researchers to find bacteria in certain kimchi, certain cabbage in different locations. Quicker and cheaper. Alright, so our discussion quiz. What is not a purpose of the discussion section? A, to explain the results of your study. B, to critique and justify your methods. C, to discuss implications and suggest further research. Or D, to describe how you prepared the materials. Yes. Which one? D again, which is not a purpose of discussion, to describe how you prepared the materials. Where do you describe how you prepared the materials? Sure. Which section do you? In the methods, yeah. Alright, so don't forget to grab your coupon at the end. Okay, this is the last section, and then we're going to, we'll discuss the introduction. We will discuss some grammar issues quickly, and then we'll have a break, so hang with me. Okay, so the last thing you'll do is write the introduction. The introduction tells the readers right away, what does the study do? Why is it important? And many researchers will tell you, and journals will tell you, introduction is the most important part as far as getting other researchers interested. Because if they read the introduction and it's great, then they're hooked. And that goes with abstract too. Abstract book. It's very, very important. Okay, so in this section, you should establish the context of the research, include gaps in knowledge that your study is going to fill, state the purpose of the work, give a hypothesis or research question, and discuss why you chose this approach, and include the main content found in the results and discussion. But you're not including the data. You're just kind of you're previewing this results. Okay, so here's some questions. What's the problem being solved? What do we know about the problem? Are there existing solutions? What have other researchers showed that we can solve this problem? What are the limitations to these solutions? What's the problem with the current understanding? And your hypothesis, what do you want to do with this study? So let's break it down, the introduction down to two main questions. First, what is the gap in knowledge that exists? And why
我们这段看完我们就先休息。
Okay, this is going to show you the importance. Why should people care about your study? And two, how does this study fill that gap? This is the role of the study, or the hypothesis, really. What's the problem? How does your study solve that problem? So for the introduction has many parts. I'd say it's the most complicated of your paper, and that's maybe why you should write it last, so you don't miss anything. So start with the background information about the topic, and this means you're going to talk about the problem. Next, talk about the motivations. Why did you do the study? What are the key primary literature that you used, that you can cite, that supports your work? What's your hypothesis or your research question? And what approaches did you use and why? This is your organization, and almost all introductions will be organized like this. So let's look at our chart again. We have this upside down pyramid shape. We start with what is known, our understanding of the world. What is unknown, and how do we fill it, our hypothesis. We'll just look at a few of these. So you want to make sure only use highly relevant sources. Only use sources that are closely related to your study, right? Don't use, Einstein if you're not writing about his exact, theories of relativity or relativity. Use keywords from your title. So in your introduction, use words from your paper title right away. And include a clear hypothesis, of course. Okay, we'll continue. Okay, so we're going to look at a different paper. This is not the kimchi paper. This is a different paper. And the title is Targeted Therapy Database, a model to match patients' molecular profile with current knowledge. So look at the keywords. Some keywords that they've used in the abstract: targeted therapy, early diagnosis, molecular profile, cancer biology. So right away, in the first paragraph, they have used a lot of keywords: cancer, early diagnosis, anti-cancer treatments, molecular target therapies. They've also provided information that explains why it's important. So they start out very broad, right? Cancer represents the third leading cause of death worldwide. Wow, that's really broad, and it also shows why the study is important. Then it moves to a little bit narrower. Early diagnosis continues to offer the best chance for most tumors. Okay, then it goes even more narrow. The efficacy of anti-cancer treatments. And it also shows why, what the problem is. They're not satisfactory. And then finally, you have the most focused general agreement exists regarding the urgency of developing molecularly targeted therapies. So your paper is about this, molecularly targeted therapies. Next, you're going to discuss the literature. So summarize what researchers knew, define key terms. Okay, this is very important, defining the terms. When I read a lot of researchers' essays, they don't define the terms. They just write, STW. And I'm like, I don't know what STW means. They don't say what it means. In the introduction, you can define it. Write the term and explain what does it mean. If it is context specific. If it's very basic, 기본적인 말이면, then don't have to define it. Okay, give a general review of the primary research literature. Again, not too many details, just general. Okay, so we have, continuing in the introduction, this is still the introduction of the same paper. The author defines the term targeted therapy. The term targeted therapy includes all those approaches that aim or tailor the therapy to the patient.
这样的再来讲医学的我们就先不听哦，现在大概7点10分，我们休息到7点20，我们7点20回来，然后我来跟大家分享那个论文写作。我们来讲图目录。